Rob Reiner, director of The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally and A Few Good Men, is a giant in Hollywood. But before he became a legendary filmmaker, he was simply Meathead, the outspoken liberal son-in-law on the groundbreaking sitcom All in the Family. And at the center of that show was Carroll O'Connor, Archie Bunker himself. For decades, audiences believed the tension between Reiner and O'Connor was just good acting. But now, at 78, Rob Reiner is finally opening up about what really went on behind the scenes, revealing a complicated truth that no one expected. The relationship between Rob and Carroll was layered with mutual respect, clashing ideologies, and a powerful emotional bond that blurred the lines between fiction and reality. At times, their disagreements were explosive, both on-screen and off. Carroll, a deeply intellectual actor with strong convictions, often battled the writers and producers over Archie's portrayal. Rob, passionate and politically charged, clashed with him over how far the show should push its boundaries. But what fans didn't see was how those battles forged an unlikely friendship, one built not just on work, but on transformation. Today, Rob Reiner describes Carroll O'Connor as one of the most influential men in his life. And yet, their journey was filled with painful moments, deep misunderstandings, and one final heartbreak that changed Rob forever. For the first time, Rob Reiner shares the truth about their complex bond and why he still thinks of Carroll to this day. This is a story of fame, conflict, legacy, and love, and the real truth behind All in the Family. When All in the Family premiered in 1971, television changed forever. Gone were the safe, sanitized sitcoms of the 1960s. Suddenly, viewers were confronted with Archie Bunker, a loud, opinionated, working-class conservative who said exactly what he thought, even if it was offensive. But across the kitchen table sat someone just as opinionated, Michael Stevick, the long-haired liberal college student played by a young, ambitious actor named Rob Reiner. The on-screen dynamic was electric. Every argument, every insult, every eye roll felt real, and in many ways it was behind the scenes. The chemistry between Rob Reiner and Carroll O'Connor wasn't just acting. It was rooted in real ideological tension, artistic passion, and two strong-willed men learning to coexist in a volatile, creative environment. Rob, the son of comedy legend Carl Reiner, was in his mid-20s, politically active, and determined to make his mark. Carroll, 20 years his senior, was a classically trained actor with a deep love for the written word, literature, and theater. They came from different generations, different experiences, and at times, completely opposite views of the world. Rob later admitted that when he first met Carroll during casting, he was intimidated, not by the actor's fame but by his intellect and presence. He had this stillness about him, Rob recalled, but when he spoke, everyone listened. The role of Archie Bunker demanded nuance. He had to be abrasive, yes, but never a caricature. Norman Lear, the show's visionary creator, knew that Carroll was the only one who could humanize Archie. What he didn't expect was how quickly Rob and Carroll's on-screen rivalry would bleed into real life. Reiner's portrayal of Michael Meathead Stivic wasn't just an act. It was a version of himself, idealistic, passionate, and at times a little self-righteous. Off-camera, Rob often voiced concerns about the scripts, pushing for more clarity on social justice issues. Carroll, meanwhile, worried that Archie was being misunderstood by audiences, seen as a lovable bigot rather than a cautionary figure. The two actors frequently debated not just scenes but the larger meaning of the show. Sometimes those discussions grew heated. There were moments on set when the line between character and actor blurred. Rob would challenge Carroll's delivery or interpretation of a scene, and Carroll, ever the perfectionist, would push back. Norman Lear later described the pair as two brilliant minds who couldn't help but challenge each other. And yet, despite the tension, something extraordinary was happening. The conflict wasn't destroying the show, it was enriching it. Their arguments, their debates, their differing worldviews all made the dynamic between Archie and Meathead feel painfully, hilariously real. The audience saw it week after week, Archie calling Michael a pinko commie, Michael firing back with sarcasm, Gloria caught in the middle, and Edith nervously offering meatloaf to calm the storm. But what they didn't see was Rob and Carroll staying behind after filming to discuss the next episode, to dissect a line of dialogue, to ask if they'd gone too far, or not far enough. There was a strange sort of love growing between them, born not from similarity but from struggle. And while they didn't always agree, they respected the hell out of each other. Looking back, Rob Reiner has said that those years shaped him more than anything else in his early career. "Carroll taught me how to listen," he confessed. "He didn't just play Archie, he understood him. And through that understanding, he taught me something about compassion, even for people you disagree with." Still, in those early seasons, their relationship was anything but smooth. There was distance. There were misunderstandings. And there were moments when Rob wondered if they'd ever truly connect outside of the roles they played. But that connection, difficult, evolving, and deeply human, was just beginning to take root. And in time, it would become one of the most meaningful bonds of Reiner's life. As All in the Family became a cultural phenomenon, so did the complicated relationship between Rob Reiner and Carroll O'Connor. Viewers loved the on-screen battles between Archie and Meathead, but off-screen, the tension was very real, and at times, hard to ignore. Rob was young, energized by activism and the shifting political winds of the 1970s. Carroll was older, methodical, and deeply protective of the show's integrity. Their debates went far beyond scripts. They clashed over politics, language, cultural messaging, and the responsibility of art in a divided America. And while some of their arguments felt like rehearsals for upcoming scenes, others cut deeper into pride, identity, and purpose. Carroll O'Connor was a man who took every line of dialogue seriously. He didn't just act, he interrogated the words. He'd rewrite portions of the script he didn't believe in, challenge comedic beats that didn't feel honest, and push back on punchlines that veered into cruelty. To Rob, this intensity sometimes felt suffocating. "There were days," Reiner later said, "when it felt like we were fighting for control over what the show should be." But the truth is, neither of us had control. We were both just trying to protect something we loved. Their off-camera relationship wasn't warm in the early years. They didn't hang out after work. They didn't call each other on weekends. There was mutual respect, yes, but also space. Rob often felt that Carroll viewed him as an idealistic kid who hadn't yet earned his stripes. Carroll, for his part, sometimes saw Rob as overly self-assured, too willing to turn the show into a political pulpit. What neither of them realized at the time was that this very tension was forging a bond stronger than either of them understood. Over time, their characters evolved, and so did they. Rob began to appreciate Carroll's emotional depth, the way he could convey rage, confusion, and heartbreak all in a single glance. Carroll, in turn, started to see Rob not as an idealistic loudmouth, but as a passionate, intelligent artist with something important to say. They began talking more between scenes, not just about scripts, but about life, family, art, justice, grief. Rob once recalled a long conversation they had between tapings, where Carroll opened up about his fears, how he worried that people were starting to root for Archie, rather than recognize him as a warning sign. It was the kind of vulnerability that transcended professional distance. And it stayed with Rob for decades. Still, the relationship was never easy. There were periods when they barely spoke, especially when creative pressures mounted. Norman Lear, the show's creator, often acted as a mediator between them, reminding each man what the other brought to the table. Lear saw what they couldn't always see in the moment, that their friction was producing something magical. The more real the tension between them became, the more authentic the show felt. And that authenticity changed television forever. One of the most telling signs of their evolving bond came during the final years of All in the Family. As the characters of Archie and Michael prepared to go their separate ways, so too did the actors. Rob left the show to pursue directing, and Carroll carried on with the spin-off, Archie Bunker's Place. On Rob's final day on set, Carroll walked over, gave him a long handshake, and, according to crew members, quietly said, "You're going to do something important." I've known it all along. It wasn't a dramatic farewell. It wasn't theatrical. But for Rob, it was everything. A nod of approval, a recognition of worth, a fatherly acknowledgement, subtle but powerful. Rob later said that it was that moment, more than any Emmy win or standing ovation, that made him feel seen by Carroll. And from that point on, Their relationship transformed from one of friction to quiet admiration. Though life would take them down different paths, their connection had been forged in something deeper than Hollywood. It was built in the trenches of television history, in the weight of shared purpose, and in the silence between takes. For all the ideological differences, creative tension, and generational gaps that once defined their relationship, the bond between Rob Reiner and Carroll O'Connor would ultimately be forged not through laughter or debate, but through heartbreak. In the years after All in the Family, life took both men in new directions. Rob was transitioning into a career behind the camera, directing what would become some of the most iconic films of his generation. Carroll, meanwhile, continued to act, finding new life in his role as Chief Gillespie on In the Heat of the Night. Their paths didn't often cross, but the mutual respect that had been quietly cultivated during the show's run never faded. And when tragedy struck, that respect evolved into something far more personal. In 1995, Carroll O'Connor's life was shattered when his only son, Hugh O'Connor, died by suicide after a long battle with drug addiction. It was a loss so profound that it stripped away every public persona Carroll had ever worn. The sharp-tongued Archie, the cool-headed Gillespie, the witty interview guest. None of those identities could protect him from the devastation of losing a child. He was gutted, and for perhaps the first time in his life, Carroll O'Connor stood before the world, not as an actor or public figure, but as a grieving father. Rob Reiner was one of the first former colleagues to reach out, not publicly, but privately. Though they hadn't spoken regularly in years, Rob understood the weight of such a loss, and more importantly, he understood what kind of man Carroll had become. According to those close to him, Rob sent a handwritten letter, not filled with platitudes or empty condolences, but with heartfelt words of solidarity. He offered whatever support Carroll needed. And more than that, he listened. In the months that followed, the two reconnected over long, quiet conversations, not about Hollywood, not about scripts or ratings, but about grief, healing, and fatherhood. Rob had become a father himself by then, and he later admitted that Carroll's pain haunted him. "I kept thinking," he said in an interview years later, "what would I do if it were my child?" How do you survive something like that? Carroll didn't have answers. He only had pain. But in Rob, he found someone who respected that pain, who didn't try to fix it or rush it, but who simply stood beside him. That period of sorrow would become a turning point in their relationship. For the first time, the dynamic between them had nothing to do with characters or scripts or political philosophies. It was just two men, flawed, aging, and deeply human, sharing the burden of what it means to live through unimaginable loss. And through that shared vulnerability, something long dormant between them was awakened. A quiet, father-son kind of love. Carroll would later become an outspoken advocate for drug awareness, using his son's story as a painful but powerful cautionary tale. Rob admired the courage it took to turn tragedy into activism. He never forgot the fire in Carroll's voice when he spoke at public events. Raw, trembling, but determined. It was the same fire Rob had seen years earlier when Carroll fought for Archie's humanity in the writer's room. Only now it wasn't about a character. It was about saving lives. Years later, Rob would reflect on that season of Carroll's life with deep emotion. "He took the worst thing that could ever happen to a person," Rob said, "and he tried to make the world better because of it. That's not something a performer does. That's something a father does. A real man." And by the time Carroll passed away in 2001, Rob had come to see him in a very different light. Not just as a co-star, not just as a mentor, but as someone who had quietly shaped his understanding of life, love, and resilience. Their bond had begun on a television soundstage, but it had matured into something far more lasting. And for Rob Reiner, that bond would continue to echo through every film he made, every cause he supported, and every loss he would one day face himself. Now at 78, Rob Reiner stands at a crossroads where memory and legacy collide. The man once known as Meathead has long since transcended the sitcom that made him famous. He's become a filmmaker, a political activist, a father, a voice of reason in chaotic times. But when asked about the early years, about All in the Family, and specifically about Carroll O'Connor, his tone softens. His eyes dim just a bit. And the answers don't come as easily. Because for Rob, remembering Carroll is not just about television. It's about growth, pain, and a complicated kind of love that never quite fit into words. In interviews, Rob has admitted that he didn't always appreciate Carroll in the moment. "When you're young, you think you know everything," he once said. "I didn't realize at the time how much I was learning from him, just by watching him work." Over the years, Rob has looked back at those long days on set with a kind of reverent nostalgia. The show may have ended, but the lesson stayed. He credits Carroll with teaching him the value of craft, the importance of patience, and the rare gift of listening, not just as an actor, but as a human being. Rob's own journey into directing was shaped in many ways by what he observed in Carroll. The subtlety of his expressions, the control in his pacing, the gravity he brought to even the lightest scenes, those things stayed with Rob. Even as he stepped behind the camera to direct films like Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, and A Few Good Men. In fact, Rob has said that Archie Bunker's complexity influenced how he wrote and directed flawed but lovable characters. "Carroll showed me that it's okay to let a character be wrong, as long as they're real. But beneath all the artistic admiration lies something even deeper: regret." Rob has quietly admitted that he wishes he'd said more to Carroll while he was still alive, that he wishes he'd been more present, more expressive, more grateful. Fame had pulled them in separate directions, and though they stayed in touch, they never had a true final conversation. When Carroll passed in 2001 at the age of 76, Rob was left not just with grief, but with unfinished thoughts. "I didn't tell him how much he meant to me," Rob said in a rare moment of vulnerability. "I didn't tell him that I loved him." To this day, Rob speaks of Carroll with a mix of pride and sorrow. He often defends him publicly, reminding younger generations that Archie Bunker was not a hero, but a mirror, a reflection of society's prejudices, meant to be challenged and questioned. He fiercely protects Carroll's artistic legacy, ensuring that he's remembered not just as a sitcom star, but as one of the greatest dramatic and comedic actors television ever produced. In one particularly moving interview, Rob recalled visiting Carroll's star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. "I just stood there," he said. "People were walking by, taking pictures. Some didn't even know who he was. And I thought, if only they knew. If only they understood what he carried, what he gave. He wasn't just Archie Bunker. He was everything underneath that character." 2. Now, in the twilight of his own life, Rob Reiner is finally speaking openly about the man who challenged him, frustrated him, mentored him, and ultimately helped shape him. Not every bond in Hollywood is transactional. Some are forged through honesty, through conflict, through shared experience. Rob and Carroll didn't always agree. They didn't always understand each other. But what they built, on screen and off, was real. And perhaps that's the greatest truth Rob Reiner has to tell about Carroll O'Connor, that behind the rants and the scripts and the applause, there was a man of great depth, great pain, and great love. A man who changed lives, not just on the screen, but in the hearts of those who knew him best.